Welcome back, listener, to another summer episode from the Inspired Writer Collective. Today, we are talking about chapter titles. And we've just kind of been thinking about this just as we work on our own manuscripts about whether or not we want to use chapter titles. Is it common in our genre? And it just raised some interesting thoughts for us. So, Elizabeth, I'll have you start talking about memoir and
Yeah.
what you're thinking.
So my struggle and my reason for not wanting to use chapter titles is because they're hard to come up with, right? You already have to create so much for your manuscript. You're writing the whole book. You've got to create a blurb for the back, and that's really intimidating. And I just sometimes have a hard time figuring out what a chapter title should be. And even now, as I think about chapter titles, I have some placeholder ones just so when I look at my manuscript, I know what that section is about. But there are some that because I'm telling my story chronologically, that to give the chapter a title, I'm covering a couple of different things that happen that appear in that chapter because of the general chapter length and things like that. But as we sat down to record this episode, we quickly perused through both Stephanie's bookshelf and I did just some quick Google searches of some major memoirs and found that many of the memoirs do use chapter titles. So the convention would be to come up with a title for each of my chapters in my memoir. So I don't really know how I feel about that because I was planning to do what I've seen across so many other books, which is to simply have a chapter number. And it's not like I'm changing points of view. I don't need to do a lot of different dates. I'm not jumping timelines or anything like that. And so I was hoping to be able to phone in that one. I did find that Wild by Cheryl Strayed did not use chapter titles. And so I was just positing to Stephanie, I wonder if that's one of the reasons why it didn't feel like memoir and it felt like fiction. And I would kind of love to borrow that element if that's how our brains were tricked in that story to just feel like it was fiction. I don't want to I also don't want to give anyone the expectations for the chapter ahead of time. It feels like it's spoiling it a little bit if I'm divorce and this is the chapter where I got divorced. I don't know. I wonder if sometimes a chapter title may cause a reader to decide okay, I'm going to put the book down for a little bit. I'm not going to keep reading tonight. Whereas if you just have a number and you've got whatever cliffhanger sentence you've left the reader with on the previous chapter, maybe they'd keep going. So I think I'm still going to be in the camp of I'd prefer not to use chapter titles unless I'm just told that I really need to have them.
Well, I think in going along with that, number one, the beauty of publishing it yourself is ultimately you can make that final decision. And that if it were to get traditionally published, there might be a little pressure to come up with chapter titles. I can definitely understand that feeling of not wanting to set the reader up too much in advance to have a preconceived notion of what is coming. Because you are, I mean, it's not specifically chronological from what I understand, but there's a flow to it.
Yeah.
And so sometimes there can be a little bit of the chapter title that can break up some of that flow, or where your mind does anticipate what's coming. And so it's kind of interesting to think about. And I'm curious if some of you are going to run out now and start, browsing through bookshelves to find out what, different authors that you like are doing. Because, I mean, we do learn from what's been done before, but then the other beauty is that there is an aspect of being able to disrupt the system a little bit too with that. And I know, I mean, certainly in my genre with contemporary romance, there are chapter numbers, but there's also a really strong trend right now of the dual point of views. So there's the bit of the head hopping where one chapter is the female main character perspective, the next is the male main character, or in some cases, there's two women or whatever,
The counterpart, the romantic.
counterpart. Yeah, exactly. So, whoever it might be, you're jumping between those different points of view.
And then the chapter would reflect that, right?
Yes,
It's like the
yes.
number and then the POV you're going to be entering into.
Yeah, and sometimes there isn't even a chapter number. Sometimes it's just the name, depending upon the book. But we were actually having an interesting conversation about this the other day because we had picked up a book, and Elizabeth had started reading it and was anticipating that it was going to be in the point of view of a character.
Because that's how it was titled, Chapter 1, the character name.
And then read on to find that it was not in that point of view. And so we then were thinking, and then Elizabeth read a little bit to me because we happened to be on the phone and we were kind of talking about it and thinking like, okay, does this mean that the chapter is about this person, not from their point of view? And so that's another thing about if you're going to put a title, especially a name, in the current trend of books, the anticipation is that it's going to be that point of view.
Strictly their point of view.
Yes.
And it would be, an error on the author's part to then include any internal thoughts of a different character or anything like scene setting that character is not able to view. And that's what happened in this particular chapter. Is it opens up with someone coming in a door behind them, and there's all this description of this person, and then the sound of the clanging of the door startles this main character, and then she turns and sees this person. So it's like she would have no awareness of what he looks like or how other people are treating him, or like it was incorrect if the title is reflective of a particular point of view. And so it was very, like, as a reader, I was very off-put, and I put the book down, to be frank. And so, it's I think it's important, right? These chapter titles are the what's the word I'm looking for? Not rituals, but practices, I guess, with like where the industry is, what common practice, what does this mean? The other time I see like just a repeated chapter title would be things like if you're jumping locations or you're changing like time frames, then there might be some of that as in place of a chapter title. I'm currently reading, I don't know what she classifies her book as, whether it's like sci-fi or speculative fiction, but it's set in the future, and there's all kind like the government is actually AI, and people have like robotic parts, and the climate is a disaster, right? And so far in that book, the chapter titles are particular characters' point of view and also a time frame, because there is some jumping of the time frame, at least so far, between chapter 1 and chapter 2. So like chapter 1 started at a certain point, and then chapter 2 took you like 2 weeks earlier. So that was indicated as part of that chapter title.
Yeah, and that's common too. Sometimes in historical romance, there will be the indication of the time period, or if there's some kind of time travel, or if a particular chapter starts, in present day, but then you go way back in time. Those are definitely indicated in the chapter title, which is helpful for a reader to determine, where they are in the time. And so those are important pieces to include, I feel, to orient your reader so that they're not all of a sudden thinking like, wait a minute, what's going on?
Right. So then what's the purpose of the chapter titles? It's just to simply orient your reader in whatever kind of additional information they need in order to understand the content of that chapter. That's why like the nonfiction books use chapter titles, right? Because in that informative style of writing, they're trying to show you so you can quickly reference what you need out of that book if you're just opening up and finding a particular thing in your how to do XYZ. But it's to give you some basic information before you start reading the chapter. And I just don't think anyone needs that in reading memoir. I don't know. I mean, certainly the more skilled writers may be able to come up with fun chapter titles that then entice the reader to keep reading. Like I was just looking up what Glennon Doyle's chapter titles were in Untamed, and saw that one of them was Blowjobs, and that's a story like where she's going to the therapist or whatever. and told to give her husband more blowjobs. But like, and so I guess if you, as the reader, as you're reading her book, if you saw that chapter title, maybe you'd be like, oh, let me keep reading, right? But I just don't think my reader is going to need any more information than what I'm delivering there in the chapter itself. So I think I'm just going to go with numbers.
Well, and I think that you should go with what feels right for your book. And I think that, and that's the other piece too, is that in the grand scheme of the publishing world, is to be with, if you choose to go with a publisher, to be with a publisher and an agent who support who you are. I mean, we have an early episode where we talked about, finding an agent is like dating. It's that, so we'll, link that in the comments, but, just sort of thinking about that. And interestingly enough, in other areas where I've been, that particular reference has come up several times. I think even when I was at a Cheryl Strayed workshop online recently, I think she even brought up that connection between, who you're searching for. So I think when it comes to aspects of your book, to find the person who's going to support you. And if that's you, then awesome. Like, be the one who makes that decision. And I know for me, I'm doing dual point of views. So it's going to be the different name, and probably the chapter number, and whoever's point of view it is where I'll be. So, listener, thank you so much for joining us. And if you have thoughts on this, we'd love to hear from you. And definitely, links to follow us are in the comments. Subscribe to our email newsletter so you don't miss some of this talk that's happening in our newsletter as well. Things that you don't hear here on the podcast, and other fun things. So happy writing.